Most criminals choose a life of crime because they see it as an easy way to enrich their lives financially, or they're forced into criminal activity due to the poor choices that they made. There are some criminals, however, that seem to thrive off the misfortune of their victims. Number 5. 45-year-old Jake Bird never stayed in the same place for very long. Since he worked as a Gandhi dancer, a phrase used to describe the individuals who laid and maintained railroad tracks in the 1940s. He couldn't remember his birth town, only that it was in Louisiana, and he had a long list of criminal convictions that included attempted murder and burglary. On the 30th of October, 1947, Officer Andrew Sabutis and Evan Davies from Tacoma Police Department were sent out to 1007 South 21st Street after receiving reports of screaming coming from inside the house. As they walked up to the property, a barefoot man emerged running from the back door. That man was Jake Bird. In a bid to escape, he crashed through the picket fence, and the officers immediately set off after him. He managed to scale a number of backyard fences, only to be thwarted by a wall that was too high to climb. When he realized that he was cornered, he pulled out a knife and attacked the officers, cutting Davies on the hand and stabbing Sabutis in the shoulder. Sabutis, however, had a background in boxing and managed to bring Bird down with a left hook and a kick to the groin. Bird was then transported to Tacoma General Hospital, where he was treated for head and face injuries. When police returned to the house where the screams were heard, they found that Bertha Klutt and her daughter had been killed with an axe that was still present at the scene. When they checked Bird's criminal history, they found that he had spent 15 years behind bars at this point, and at his interrogation, Bird admitted to the crime. He stated that he thought it would be an easy burglary, but brought the axe along as bluff after he found it in a nearby shed. He'd stolen $1.50 from Bertha's purse and made his way to the kitchen when he realized that she was standing behind him. He claimed to have told her he only wanted money and shoes, but she attacked him, forcing him to defend himself with the axe. He also claimed self-defense for attacking Davies and Sabutis. At his trial, he pleaded not guilty, but ended up receiving a death sentence. At his sentencing, Bird declared, quote, "All you guys who had anything to do with this case are going to die before I do." A year later, 5 people connected to his case passed away from heart attacks, and his declaration came to be known as the Jake Bird Hex. Number 4. Cordelia Botkin was born in Kansas City, Missouri in 1854. When she was 18 years old, she married Welcome Botkin, and they would go on to have a son named Beverly. They lived together in Stockton, California, where Welcome worked as a stockbroker. As time went on, the couple became estranged, and Cordelia started having an affair with John Preston, who was married to Mary Pennington Dunning, the daughter of Congressman John Brown. Although Cordelia was getting on in age and had what some people called a frumpy appearance, she thought very highly of herself, often boasting that she'd been photographed over 100 times. After 3 years, Mary found out about the affair and left John to move back to Dover. John rented a room at the same hotel as Cordelia, and on one occasion, mentioned to her that his wife loved chocolate. When he was called away to the Spanish-American War, he informed Cordelia that he would not be coming home to her, but rather to Mary. She pleaded with him to reconsider, but his mind was made up, leaving Cordelia in a state of melancholy and delirium. On the 31st of July, 1898, Cordelia went to the Market Street candy store, where she bought a box of chocolates, asking the clerk to pack them in a plain box with room for a present. She then went to a novelty store where she bought a handkerchief bearing the inscription "The City of Paris." Ensuring that the package could not be traced back to her, she laced the chocolates with cyanide and sent it to Mary. Mary and her sister, Ida Dean, became violently ill and would pass away from ingesting the poisoned chocolates. Mary's father launched an investigation into his daughter's deaths when he realized that the handwriting on the package matched that of the taunting letters that had been sent to Mary. John returned to Dover upon hearing the news and immediately recognized Cordelia's handwriting. She was arrested in Stockton while visiting her estranged husband, and clerks from the shops she'd visited when buying the candy and handkerchief testified against her. She was found guilty of 2 counts of murder and given a life sentence. Number 3. Henry Landrieu was born in Paris in 1869 and received his education from monks at a Catholic school. He served as an altar boy at the neighboring church that his family attended. He would go on to marry Marie Catherine, who worked as a laundress. Henry, however, would struggle to hold down a job, working at times as a plumber, accountant, a furniture salesman, and an assistant to a toy maker. Catherine would describe him as the perfect husband, though she did admit that he was a bit of a skirt chaser. But Henry had ambitions to become an inventor. In 1898, he designed a motorbike that he called the Landrieu. He then deceptively gained investments which he kept to himself rather than using it to build a factory as promised. He also made attempts at designing an automated children's toy and a suburban railway line west of Paris. In 1904, he tried to defraud a bank but was arrested when he fell over while trying to escape. While spending time in prison, a psychiatrist found that he was on the brink of insanity, but was still responsible for his own actions. During the next decade, he would be in and out of prison on several occasions and would eventually be exiled to New Caledonia. He escaped his exile and traveled to Chantilly with Jeanne Couchet, a 39-year-old seamstress who hoped to marry him. When she discovered his criminal past, she and her son Andre left him and were never seen again. Henry started posting messages in the Lonely Hearts section of a mass circulation daily paper, which attracted the attention of 9 women. Upon meeting each of the women, he would seduce them, and after gaining access to their assets, he would end their lives before burning their remains in his oven. Since there were no bodies to be found, the women were presumed to be missing until the sister of one of these women tracked him down and convinced police to arrest him. Investigators would eventually find a journal in which he listed all of his victims, and he would be sentenced to death. He was executed in February of 1922, and his head is still on display at the Museum of Death in Hollywood. Number 2. Born in Mexico City, Juana Barraza was sold by her alcoholic mother for 3 beers when she was just 13 years old. She would have 4 children, though her oldest son died from injury sustained during a mugging. She would eventually become a professional wrestler under the ring name The Silent Lady. In 2005, Mexican police named a serial killer that they were hunting as, quote, the little old lady killer. The killer's modus operandi was to target women over the age of 70 who lived alone, and they would be found dead after being severely beaten and strangled. The killer was profiled as having a brilliant mind and very careful not to get caught. It was also suggested that the killer would gain the trust of the women before carrying out their heinous act, and it was suspected it may be a man posing as a government official who would offer the victims a chance to sign up for welfare programs. At one point, it was thought that 2 serial killers may be working together, and investigators were thrown off course by the fact that 3 of the victims owned a copy of an 18th century painting called Boy in a Red Waistcoat. Witnesses described seeing a man dressed in women's clothing attempting to gain entry to one of the victims' houses, and so police started an investigation into the cross-dressing men in the area. But they made a major breakthrough in the case when a woman was detained after fleeing from the house of Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro. That woman was Juana Barraza, and they found that she'd used a stethoscope to strangle some of her victims after posing as a social worker. Fingerprint evidence would link her to 10 murders, though it's thought that her victim count could be as high as 40. At her trial, she admitted to only one murder, but on the 31st of October, 2008, she was found guilty of 16 counts of murder and aggravated burglary, including 11 separate counts of murder. She was sentenced to 759 years behind bars, running concurrently, but the maximum allowed sentence under Mexican law was just 60 years. Number 1. Jolly Jane Tobin grew up in a female asylum in Boston, where many unwanted children were left when abandoned. She and her sister were 2 of over 100 children left there before Jane was fostered as an indentured servant to a widow called Ann Tobin. When she turned 18, she was given $50 and freed of her duties, but she chose to continue working as a servant until Anne passed away and Anne's daughter married. She then attended Cambridge Hospital, where she trained to become a nurse. While working as a student nurse, she was well liked by her patients, often falsifying their medical records to ensure a longer stay so that she could get to know them better. She had a different view of her elderly patients, however, as she saw them as useless and not worth keeping alive. She would often dose her elderly patients with opium to see how they reacted and would then increase the dosage, ultimately resulting in their deaths. She would go on to poison them with various other drugs and would often nurse them back to health, claiming that they were miraculous recoveries. She started working as a private nurse for families in Boston when she would end the lives of older family members before robbing them. She even went as far as killing her landlords, friends, and colleagues when their company became too tiresome. When she made the error of using a metal-based poison on one victim, an investigation was finally launched and she was caught. She was tried in 1902 and was found not guilty, but she confessed to her lawyer that she'd ended the lives of over 100 people, and that she would sometimes get into bed with her victims as they died. She stated that her life goal was to kill more people than any other man or woman who ever lived. Another trial was immediately scheduled and she was found guilty. She would spend the rest of her life confined to an asylum, as she had when she was a child. Many people still consider Jane to be America's first ever serial killer. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.